Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your co-host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. With me, as always, is my co-host, Derek Cohen. He's our Vice President of Policy. And we are super excited today to have a special guest. Melissa Ford Maldonado is the Policy Director for our Secure and Sovereign Texas campaign. Melissa, welcome to the show. Happy to have you. I think we're going to have a lot of fun today. Tell us a little bit about what Secure and Sovereign Texas is and what you guys are trying to do.
So Secure and Sovereign Texas, it's relatively new here at TPPF, as you guys know. It was born out of a new need because before that we had the Right on Immigration campaign, right? Mm-hmm. Which aimed to fix the legal immigration system, but
sort of a DC perspective.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, okay. But
there was a gap left, and that was there's a real problem at the border. The federal government isn't doing anything about it. So let's create a campaign to see what Texas can do. Mm-hmm. To fix the crisis at the border. And so SST was born out of that, just to see what Texas can do to protect Texas citizens. Mm-hmm. And then we're under two umbrellas. So we have the border, and then we have Mexico policy, which we also work a lot in. So just looking at the relationship between the U.S. and Mexico, what can be done with the current dysfunction that is in there.
Sure.
And so, that's why SST was born.
And so the thing I like about it is it's not just the security part, like you mentioned several times, about, securing, but the sovereignty also,
right.
Reinforcing federalism, is still a concept in this country. So I like it there as well. All right. So that's Secure and Sovereign Texas. And we're going to talk about probably the most important issue to Texans is, of course, border security and immigration. Right. We're going to get into that with you. A lot going on in that. So we'll probably spend most of the show talking about that. But as always, I like to start with something a little bit of fun to get everybody's juices flowing and all of that. Saw today that Subway, the fast food chain, has decided that they have a contest that if you change your legal name to Subway, that you will receive free Subway for the rest of your life. Now, I'm going to assume that that's probably not something that either one of you would do unless you have just a secret passion for Subway. But is there I'm just curious, is there something that if you could receive something for the rest of your life for free, is there something that you love so much that you change your name for it?
Well, let me see. I can do the math there. Let's see. It's $5 per foot long times how many times a day? No, I was thinking about this when I saw that, but I think I'd say what I'd probably go with would be Derek Molson Coors. It sounds like aristocracy.
Derek Molson Coors, yeah.
And not only that, but that's a really large brand portfolio that you'd have access to if the same tenants apply.
So you're going with the parent company. So all of so you're not just going with the Coors. You're going with like the full catalog.
That sounds like cheating.
Yeah, well, and also Derek Diageo sounds a little. It sounds like a stage name, So I don't know if that would apply.
You could go with something like Jack Daniels Phillips. That way, at least it's like it's like a real name.
You could live with that.
Yeah.
Didn't they also? They had a competition where if you got a tattoo of a Subway, you would get free Subway for life. I think recently too.
They right now they still have that thing at Bangers where you can get the free tattoo if you.
Does it have to be like a neck tattoo or something?
That's insane.
Melissa, what would be yours?
I don't know what my name would end up being, but maybe Chipotle. Just because I spend way too much money there. I think I could eat it for every single meal.
Mine would probably be T-Box Phillips or something. It'd be, free golf for life is probably what I do. All right. Okay. All right. So let's get into the more serious stuff. I love talking about all that interesting stuff, but let's get into more serious stuff. As always, there's a little bit of a shameless plug at the very beginning. We have a really popular newsletter. We'd love for you to join it if you're not already on it. It's called The Post. It's our weekly recap of kind of everything that's going on in Texas and stuff that we're commenting on. I do a weekly column at the beginning, so there's some exclusive content, and you can sign up for The Post at texaspolicy.com/thepost. You can find it there and stay up to date without having to do too much work on all things that are going on in Texas. All right, so we are going to get to a couple of topics. I want to recap. The border war is going to court, and we'll kind of walk through kind of how we ended up in court, how the state of Texas ended up in court with the Biden administration. Turns out the border's secure. We heard from the DHS secretary.
My job here is done.
Yeah, you're done. So we are secure
Congrats,
and sovereign and fantastic. So we're going to figure out something next for you to do. Also, Texas is the worst. Did y'all know that? Texas is the absolute worst state in the country, according to CNBC. We'll unpack that a little bit. And then I know Derek is hot to talk about America's bravest congressman. America's bravest congressman, is from right here in the Austin area.
True hero.
And so we will talk about that and maybe some other sort of course, this is TPBF. We got to talk about parent empowerment. So we might get to that at the end of the show. All right. So want to get right into it with Melissa. Melissa, just briefly, if you could catch us up. I'm sure our audience is, following along with this because they're smart folks. And of course, immigration and border security is the number one issue in Texas for all people, not just for conservatives or Republicans, but for everybody in Texas, independents. It is the number one issue. So just get us up to speed on kind of where we are and how the governor landed in court.
Yeah, so I think it was Thursday that this happened, that the federal government, the Justice Department, sent a letter to the governor threatening to sue because of these new, I think it's like 1,000-meter floating buoy barrier. I had no idea what it looked like. I had to look up a picture to see what it looked like because I had never heard of this before.
Kind of looks like those obstacles from that show Wipeout.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
They're just like these floating buoys, like the kind of thing that you would see in a pool, but in a giant version. And so that was put in place in the river by Texas to prevent migrants from using the Rio Grande to cross into the U.S. illegally. And so the federal government threatened the governor in Texas that they would sue, and they did indeed sue this week. And so they're suing Texas for doing a job that they should be doing, and that the people of Texas and the people of the U.S. have been begging the federal government to step up to. So it's very interesting. They have this kind of dog in the manger attitude. They don't allow Texas to do anything about it, but they also don't do anything about it.
Right.
And so
and of course our communities are suffering all along the border.
Right. But they're saying that the new buoy system poses a threat to navigation, the flow of waters, and that they should have asked for permission to the Army Corps of Engineers, which, as a lot of us know, it's very expensive to do that. It takes a very long time. And the federal government has not been doing anything, even though Texas has been begging them to for a really long time.
Derek, your thoughts on sort of the response from Texas on this? The governor put it out there. Usually we've tested this, and anything that the governor can do to shore up the border has been getting a lot of support. And so he was, being very aggressive, to Melissa's point about us doing something to protect our communities. Texas doing something. The DOJ comes out and says, "Hey, if you don't stop this, we're going to come and sue you." And the governor put out a statement, basically said, "Pound sand."
Yeah.
Well,
you and I have discussed this before. I don't know what other options there are. I mean, we're like 2 away from sharks with lasers on their heads, it seems, is going to be. Well, I mean, freshwater sharks, of course.
Is that a thing?
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe like brackish water, but we can talk about the different salinity issues later on. But all that to say is, I don't know what they expected. And, we're going to talk about Mayorkas' comments later on. But this willful obstinance on doing anything on the border is just, it perpetuates, And so when Abbott, does something that, puts a modicum of obstruction in the process, like, again, we're still talking about standing as the tide's coming in and holding like a bucket trying to keep it from happening. That should, again, we all want it. But the courts are going to probably take a look at this and say, well, it's against, the navigable waterways, and that's even though the area it is not very deep nor navigable, nor areas around that are navigable. But all to say, that's just a pretext for actually getting this into court. And as we know, there's going to be I would say probably a take very similar from the court, depending on how much they air to Arizona v. U.S. But that being said, regardless of how this turns out, I don't know what else the governor has at his disposal. Because absent, an actual federal concerted effort that would include some foreign policy elements, I don't see how we get this done.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask Melissa about that real quick. My take on it is, look, the border is not a finish line. Right? Like, it's a very difficult trek. We understand that it's, there's all kind of humanitarian issues with how the cartels treat the folks that they're transporting and all that. But just because you make it to the Rio Grande doesn't mean that we cut the ribbon when you get over here. I mean, there is, the wire and the buoys and obviously personnel and the technology and all the barriers and the unfinished wall. I mean, we're still trying to keep people out and deter them from going,
between the ports of entry.
Yeah, exactly. Between the ports of entry. And one of the things that the governor said said, which I just thought was total fire, is he said, look, no one drowns on a bridge.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this is also a humanitarian move is to, I mean, when we say deter, we're serious. You know, we don't want people, I mean, even buoyless waters, people go into them and they drown. And we've seen, you know, horror stories from some of the migrants have lost just trying to cross a river with nothing in it. And so, you know, to his point, nobody drowns crossing a bridge.
Yeah.
It's trying to do the humanitarian thing to get people to go, you know, if they believe they have legitimate asylum claims, to go and do it the right way. One of the man, this just tone deaf administration, Melissa. Here's their concern with the buoys and their sort of legal case or whatever. But I want to get you to react to the last thing that they say, which is its effect on foreign policy and what Mexico thinks about this. They said the floating barrier poses threats to navigation and public safety and presents humanitarian concerns. That's what Derek said already. Additionally, the presence of the floating barrier has prompted diplomatic protests in Mexico.
My gosh.
The Mexicans don't like it. And then, quote, risks damaging U.S. foreign policy. What has been the Mexican reaction to the buoys, and what's your, you know, what should be our response?
Yeah. And real quick, I just want to add that Texas can. Right? I think a lot of people are saying like, yes, Texas is doing this. We're not supporting this because it's illegal, because that would be very hypocritical of us to go after illegal immigration and then say like it's okay for us to act illegally.
Yeah.
Texas can do this. Like the 10th Amendment says that we are sovereign entities, one. And then also Article 1, Section 10, we have the power to defend our territory. And then also our governor is our commander-in-chief. Like there's a lot to unpack. I'd be happy to link some things so people can read into it. I know we're not trying to go too deep into it, but Texas can defend itself.
Oh, this is nerd territory right here. Get as deep as you need to get. I mean, people love that stuff.
And then what you were saying about, you know, the fact that the buoys are being called inhumane, I really want to keep going on that, because I think people don't think about the alternative, you know, and is the alternative humane? It's not. It actually perpetuates suffering. It gives a lot more power to the cartels to be able to exploit and endanger people. And before these buoys were even put in place to begin with, the Texas-Mexico border was already the most dangerous land crossing in the world. And there was people dying left and right, people left by the cartels in the heat, people already drowning in the river. And so, as you say, this is actually a humane thing so that people go through points of entry and it doesn't interfere with immigration, because people can still come in and should come in and claim asylum if they want to. And so just wanted to say what you were saying is very true. But on the topic of Mexico and our great diplomatic relations, it's very funny to me to see that they are now coming out and like invoking all of these treaties and agreements when they have not been willing to work at all or cooperate
suddenly
with
the
the
treaties
US.
matter to them, right?
Yeah, suddenly it's they want to work with us, but they have completely ceased all cooperation with the United States, especially under the recent administration, the current administration of AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. And so now they're coming out when they've been giving an opportunity to work with the U.S. for so long, for years. People, even on the Mexico side, have been asking for help with the border, which is a border we both share. Both countries share it.
Right. That's a really good point. The people of Mexico don't want this either. They see the violence on their side of the border as well.
Yeah. Recently, the Ciudad Juárez, where it meets with El Paso, their governor, her name's Maru Campos, she's dealing with a lot of the migration that's coming through Mexico. And Mexico has kind of become this doormat, a lot of people call it, because of all the people that are coming, not just from Mexico, but from all around the world and using Mexico to go into the U.S. And so their governor recently asked the president, begged the president, sent it in a letter saying, like, we can't handle the flow of migrants. Like, please help us. We need to do something about this because they're suffering too.
Yeah.
But in response to that, the government said, like, we will not do anything to stop the free passage of migrants through Mexico. You know, we are a country with open doors, and we will do what we need to do to enable our foreign brothers to come and pass through Mexico if they want to. Also, we're not the United States migration police. So again, like, they've been given plenty of opportunities to help us manage the border we share, both countries share, and they have just completely neglected that responsibility as well. So
interesting that they're shirking responsibility for enforcing laws in the other country when they make particular demands on our Second Amendment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. And just one more thing I want to keep talking about is we don't have. This is something we say all the time in SST. It's like become a logo, but we don't have a partner in Mexico right now. We have a partner in the Mexican people, but we don't have a partner in the Mexican government right now. And there's so much that I could say on this. I don't have all day, but just a few things is, okay, here's something recent that I'll say. I think it was like 2 weeks ago, AMLO was asked in a press conference what he was willing to do to end all of the disappearances. Because I don't know if you guys knew this, but AMLO's presidency right now is the most violent presidency in modern Mexican history.
Which is really saying something.
Yeah, with his policy of like hugs, not bullets, right? But there is a disappearance every hour, I think, under AMLO, which is insane. I'll have to check that stat and send
No,
it
I think
to you
that's
guys.
right. I think we
But I
we
think
wrote
that's
that,
right,
yeah.
right? A disappearance every hour. And there is like obviously so much violence, so many murders that go unaccounted for. And so he was asked about this, and he was saying, like, what are you willing to do to stop this problem? And he said publicly that he would be willing to work with the cartels to form some sort of social pact.
To continue to work with the cartels.
To
then.
continue, yes, of course. But he had never, admitted something like that publicly.
Wow.
But he said like that he would be willing to work with them to achieve some sort of social pact to end the violence. And so that, alongside with so much other evidence, he's never said a single bad word about the cartels. So it's evident that he is working with them. He would much rather cooperate with the cartels than with the United States. So we have no partner in Mexico, and they've also failed in their duty to make sure that their land does not become a breeding ground for terrorist activity or become, a breeding ground for dangerous activity towards the U.S. They have completely failed in that.
Right. It's not just the cartels and smuggling drugs and humans over and all the violence that comes with that. I mean, it could be a breeding ground for international terrorism if it's become
absolutely.
essentially a narco state where anybody with money or guns can come in and set up shop.
I mean, 35 to 40% of Mexico, cartels call all the shots. Things like potholes, like the little things to the big things, they're basically the government there. And then recently, our former secretary and CIA director, Mike Pompeo, he wrote a book. Josh and I were talking about it recently. It's called Never Give an Inch. And he goes into detail there about the threats posed by the U.S.-Mexico border and all these, he calls them undergoverned spaces, where basically there is no government, and how those spaces are becoming complete breeding grounds for terrorist activity from people in the Middle East, Hezbollah, all of these that maybe the counterterrorism efforts in their country are getting too heavy for them to bear. And so these ungoverned spaces are huge threats to the U.S. It's terrifying. It seems like something out of a movie,
right?
But it's real. And so Mexico has failed to be a partner to the U.S. on all fronts. And so it's funny they're now invoking, all these treaties and agreements and acting like they want to work with us when they haven't and they don't.
I think it bears mentioning, though, because you really hit the nail on the head, that when we hear the left talk about anything or opine on the policies that your particular campaign discusses and puts out, we get to a point where it's just like, oh, well, it's just, jingoistic racism that you want to see all these people drown in the river or, get hung up on buoys and stuff like that. But they are serving as useful idiots for the people that are, and useful idiots is a term of art, of course, because, I don't think they're that useful. So, but all that to say is, but they're serving that role for nefarious interests, not even coming to the policy discussion from an honest place. And so the fact that AMLO is, referring to the cartels like they're the Rotary Club, that's, while that's to be expected from his geopolitical incentive structure, I still question why we have folks on this side of the Rio Grande that hold the takes that they do, specifically in the areas of immigration and border security.
And speaking of takes on this side of the Rio Grande, the DHS Secretary, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro, is it Mayorkas? Was in front of Congress yesterday, or at least in front of the Oversight Committee. There were a lot of tough questions that were asked of him. You watched the proceedings.
Yeah.
What is your overall impression of the job that the DHS Secretary is doing? I think you let on how you might feel about that with that big sigh.
Doing better than a press secretary. You got to give him that.
Yeah.
Well, did you guys see what he said yesterday about?
Tell us what you saw.
So this gives me so much like secondhand embarrassment, first of all, because it's to anybody so blatantly untrue. And so he said yesterday that under his tenure, cartels are now in Mexico weaker than ever.
I did not see that.
Which,
I'm sure the media avoided that headline. So the cartels in Mexico, who are now hand in hand with the president there, are now weaker under the Biden administration.
And the Biden administration is who we have to thank for the cartels now being, honestly, they are richer, they are more armed, and they are bolder than ever. And that is thank you to the current administration. And just being able to say something like that publicly is just so embarrassing for them, because everybody knows that the Biden administration has created a border, a weak border, an open border that has caused the cartels to thrive. I mean, they're making more money than ever off of drugs, off of smuggling, and
billions of dollars. I mean, when you do the math, it's staggering. I mean, some of these cartels would be, like some of the Forbes 500 largest corporations.
They run that way. They're like $1 billion company. They run like it's a Fortune 500 company, and they are the most well-funded criminal organization in the entire world. And they've only gotten richer, they've only gotten bolder, and it's so absolutely shocking to see the statements that he made.
And business is apparently good, according to our stats that we looked up. 1.7 million migrant encounters in 2021, over 2.4 million in 2022. How can the secretary, who is supposed to be in charge of, who has overseen that and in charge of that, I don't know, Derek. I don't know if you watched it yesterday. You said you were watching the UFO hearings yesterday, which is also very important because that's a different type of alien. But we'll throw.
I'm looking at his paper. He did not have that written
waiting
down.
all day to use that one. No, that one just came to me. But I mean, just the politics of this stuff. I mean, they've talked about impeaching Mayorkas. Is that something that can happen? Would that even matter under this president?
Yeah, I mean, should he be impeached? Absolutely. Will he be impeached? Maybe. Will anything happen over on the Senate side? Absolutely not. And I think that's because if you look at the cabinet level positions appointed by President Biden, I mean, Tom Vilsack's doing a decent job at ag, and that's about it.
About it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
energy not so good.
Yeah, I think a lot of. I think a lot was made of President Trump's hiring ability that I think, sometimes doesn't withstand the light of day. Present company excluded, obviously, Melissa.
Melissa used to work at the White House, so throw that out there.
Well, I mean, Scaramouche, we can go on, right? But that being said, but still, that cabinet was still so far, leaps and bounds, better than the one we have now. His inner circle was just, like a gang of bums. You got, I mean. Again, you have Mayorkas saying that don't worry, the border is closed, and it's the border being closed. Okay, well we can finally
move on to the next thing.
And then you have Corinne Jean-Pierre that actually made me think, man, come back, Jen Psaki, all is forgiven.
Wow.
And it's we get to this point.
Just sort of the "miss me yet" meme from Psaki.
Yeah, exactly. Because you know what, she was at least a very good liar. Like you'd get halfway down the path she was leading you, and then you'd be like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Where for example, with I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head because I try not to watch White House press conferences, but they'd be like, yeah, what we found when we're talking about the buoys in the Rio Grande is that water's wet. She's like, well, actually, it's a common misconception. And then she'll do a half hour on why water's actually dry. And then at the end, you're like, were we supposed to be convinced by that? And again, then Hunter will do something, and the whole narrative.
It's
changes.
unconscionable, and I think the fact is it doesn't even pass the laugh test, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for someone to stand up there, and you guess you kind of assume that they're going to have to stand up there and say this, right? Like they're going to have to come in. The president's always going to say, the State of the Union is strong despite all the evidence against it. But something like that, you'd think they'd have at least a little better answer.
Yeah.
What do you believe? My words or your own lying eyes?
Yeah. Well, honestly, it's shocking, but it's not surprising at all, because for the last couple of years they have not been able to look at the border crisis in the eye, and they are working what I think is probably the largest cover-up in American history with what's happening at the border.
Well, Chad Wolf, the former DHS secretary, has said that they're cooking the books, that in fact what they did was they didn't change the law to make it harder to get in. They changed the law to simply allow more people to get in the legal way and go, basically go across the bridge, and then they get to stay. And I won't go through all the details.
Super duper secret parole.
Yeah, I won't go through all the details of how that works. We get a little bit in the weeds, but that's basically what they're doing is they're just changing the definitions or creating these new programs that say, oh no, basically skirts current law and allows people to come here under parole, and so you have less, crossings or less illegal crossings because you just made people who used to be illegal are now legal.
Yeah, or they'll release numbers of how immigration has dropped, maybe at certain ports of entry, but they don't account for all of the immigration and all of the abuse and mistreatment of migrants that's going on within ports of entry. And I wanted to share a quick poll that I saw with you guys that I thought was very relevant to what the secretary said yesterday. And it's that the majority of Americans, it's over 61%, believe that the Mexican drug cartels have more control of the border than the current administration. And so I think that goes to show what a bad job they're truly doing.
Sure.
That the majority of Americans would think that. And
Absolutely.
So for him to be up there and be basically patting himself on the while no American believes this is just absolutely outrageous.
And jump into those numbers. I mean, 61% of the country is not, anti-Biden Republican. I mean, so there's a significant portion of those folks who are the Biden audience, who are people who are Biden supporters, who with their own eyes and limited ability to see, you're an insider. You think about this stuff every single day, but average Americans are seeing this too, and people who supported the president are seeing this, and that's how you get to a number like 61% of Americans are think that the cartels have more control.
They just assume it's the status quo. They know that the cartels have operational control of the border.
Well, and with millions of people coming across, how could you not? I mean, okay.
And just last thing, I think in light of that, I want to bring up, go back to the governor and just say, I think we should all admire what he's doing. He's taken every single step, even unconventional steps that he's been able to take constitutionally to secure our border for this very reason. Mm-hmm. And I think people are very quick to jump in and throw shade at Operation Lone Star, but I think people need to recognize that Operation Lone Star has been extremely successful from a law enforcement perspective, and nobody can deny that. They have apprehended so many criminals, terrorists. They've seized so many drugs. I think the number right now is at 418 million.
It's over 418
It's over
million.
400. Yeah, it's over that. And because this is an old number that I have. So it's way over that, which is enough to kill every man, woman, and child in the whole United States. Mm-hmm. And not just that, but all of the guns they've seized, all the things that they've seized at the border. How could anyone say that that's unsuccessful? I mean, the amount of drugs and the amount of overdoses that we have here and what Operation Lone Star has been able to stop is amazing. And so I just wanted to say that.
And also, and I think that this is where, again, the left has largely abandoned the field. What's their alternative? And is that alternative saying, oh, well, we need, more legal immigration, because it's there's a lot of people even on the right that agree with that, but that is a after the fact post hoc rationalization if you don't even have a secure border on which to base that particular policy change.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thank you, Melissa, for saving that segment, because I was trying to end up on a positive note, and I really didn't have anywhere to go because thank you. No, but that's a great way to put a bow on that, is that the fact is that the governor has been very aggressive, and despite the media trying to poo-hoo the efforts and ignore the failures of the Biden administration, it has been successful. It has had tremendous results and probably saved countless lives as a result. All right, so we'll get to a couple other issues, some things that just kind of rolling around the media and in the state. One of the big things that came out a couple weeks ago is CNBC has a ranking of the best business states in Texas, in the country, the best business states in the country. But of course, like anything else that the left controls, they have to destroy it with all of their woke garbage. Mm-hmm. And so Texas somehow, even though it's one of the best business states, and we'll get into kind of why that is, now says that Texas is one of the worst states to live in. That they're kind of pushing this idea that even though Texas has a really robust economy and people are tripping over themselves to get here and move here, it's actually one of the worst states to live in. And here's the rationale for it. Essentially, they have this category category called life, health, and inclusion, which that should be your first red flag, which life, health, and inclusion are misnomers. They're actually what they mean is our abortion laws, Medicaid expansion, and then, of course, transgender agenda and issues that we're conservatives here in Texas, and so we're pro-life. We don't support big government takeovers of healthcare, and, of course, we don't support and have actively opposed the transgender agenda here in Texas. And so that makes it the worst place to live. Derek, just your initial thoughts on this kind of stuff, because it used to be a pretty credible list. And so my point is that it did take there were objective measures as to why Texas was a leading state in the economy, and they even admit Texas is still the number 2 best state in the country for the economy. But you get this leftist push, and now all of a sudden it just waters down and makes this sort of ranking meaningless.
Well, recording this in late July, if you told me the Weather Channel came out and said that Texas is the worst state to live, I'd say let them speak, hear them out, right? But that being said, again, you mentioned the word objective within your detailing the criteria that are used to make this particular ranking. And what is objective about some of these categories in the inclusion categories? Because here's the thing: if I ran a business and I was looking for a place to relocate, or looking if a relocation would benefit the bottom line, to do the fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, granted, we can go on the whole ESG thing as y'all did last show, and we have done many times in the past. But even with that, the best return on investment is still going to be Texas. Now, there are things that Texas needs to fix in the business space. Not only the tax climate could always be improved, even though it's pretty good and it has gotten better recently. We do need to make sure the grid is more robust than it is currently, so that if you're coming here to run your widget factory, that you can still produce widgets, on peak time demand. But all that to say is this stuff that is, thought to be quality of life, these are divisive issues. I remember you were going through that polling, and these are not issues the issues that are going into that criteria are not the issues that animate the average Texan. These are basically things that they say, oh, well, this is a bad thing to do. And look, you might have individual employees for which that is true, but not only that, but there are very limited areas in which Texas engages in what one would consider the culture wars, or the stuff that would go into this category, versus what we see in other states, whether you're talking about the antithesis of some of our policies, abortion up to and sometimes after birth, talking about state-funded transgender. There's another side of that coin, and scoring the states with those people are not flocking there. One other thing I'll say on this, because I did see somebody came out in the wake of this report saying, look, well, I can't remember the company's name, but so-and-so moved to New York. That was because they got a handout package that would have made Scrooge McDuck blush. And that's, look, we can't control other states wanting to I know that was a lot of the animating discussion when the whole revitalization of Chapter 313 that went through. And you're never going to be able to outspend with other people's money, and get everybody happy. But what we can do is keep the playing field as low and as level as possible, so that everyone can come here for their widget factories and make those
compete
widgets.
with widget competitions. And that level playing field is one of the reasons why people are moving here. And Melissa, as we mentioned, you were a DC swamp rat, like I was a recovering DC swamp rat, just like me. So I'm in that boat as well. When you were looking around, looking at jobs and places to come, and did you look at Texas and think, that's just not a place that I think I could that I think I would want to live, because it looks like one of the worst states in Texas.
I'm telling you, at the time we were living in DC was awful to live in, especially post-COVID. It was terrible. I remember that you couldn't go to restaurants, you couldn't walk outside without a face mask on, post-COVID. And meanwhile, the mayor was throwing huge birthday parties. I don't know if you guys remember that.
No,
but
it makes all the sense
I
in
remember
the world.
at the time everybody was talking about moving to Texas. Everybody.
Texas
all
or
of my
Florida,
friends
right?
in DC, and so a lot of them did, actually, not just me. But I moved to California first. I've lived in a lot of places.
You are recovering in many different ways.
So
you got here eventually.
Eventually I made it here. But I can tell you, Texas is the best place that I've ever lived, and people are still moving here like crazy. So that says a lot. I mean, all of us, we're not Texan. You guys aren't Texan.
I was born here, but again,
But
I
you-
spent 20 years in and out of D.C. So
and then you had to move here. Like we
gotta
all
come
made
back.
the willing decision to move here because we value other things a little bit more than maybe like LGBT inclusivity, such as like economic opportunity. And rankings are a funny thing
Yeah.
because I see this ranking, but I also recently saw rankings about how even just the Austin area is the best place to live right now for rent affordability and job opportunities. And so
Right. Well, and that's what, and one of the things, if you actually look at the details of their study or whatever, you know that what they're doing is they're taking what used to be a credible, objective analysis of states, and they're pushing this woke ideology into it because they're essentially trying to use the credibility or what credibility it had to try and coerce states like Texas to adopt these left-wing policies.
Right.
And digging into the numbers, the reality is Texans actually support all of these policies, right? I mean, a majority of Texans do support restrictions on abortion.
The ones that are here and the ones that are moving.
Yeah, and so all Texans do support this. We do tons of polling, as I've always mentioned. Texans do support these policies that they object to. Second of all, so do non-Texans because we've got millions and millions. There was a report again that came right after this from Bloomberg saying that the Southeast is now the juggernaut, the economic juggernaut in the United States, and the places that used to be like the Northeast are losing out. We've got 2.2 million people that have moved here in the last couple of years, bringing $100 billion of income with them. Meanwhile, states like New York and New Jersey that have the policies that CNBC likes are losing $60 billion in the last 2 years. And so people are voting with their feet. And so this is just another nonsense, left-wing push.
Well, I'll say, I think CNBC would be better served if they just broke that out as a separate ranking and say, like, this is the woke nonsense index or whatever the case you'd call it. And, we'd come in, I'd still have to think that, maybe Alabama, Mississippi would edge us, but, we'll say we'll be in the top 45. But that being said is, contrast that with the states that would score very highly there and then see if that actually has any sort of correlation with economic performance. Because I think, much like you laid out, I think that those are wholly distinct phenomena and people are voting on the parts that are not included within that woke side.
Right.
All right, we only have a couple minutes left, and so I definitely want to get to an issue that we wanted to laugh about. Is that one of Texas's congressmen just completed a thirst strike in solidarity with this nonsense policy, this nonsense issue that we've been talking about, this not allowing water breaks in Texas. We've talked about the Death Star bill. The left has turned this into a complete ridiculous issue, claiming that the Death Star bill will essentially lead to preventing water breaks from construction workers and the heat, in Texas heat, and people are going to die and people are going to get heat exhaustion and so on and so forth. Of course, we've laid all this out. It's a complete non-issue. People aren't dying from heat exhaustion, even though 93% of the state is not covered under an ordinance. We don't have bodies falling or water breaks being denied to workers and so on and so forth. So the issue is, Derek, that Congressman Casar, who basically represents from Austin to San Antonio, had a thirst strike. Turns out his thirst strike lasted 8 hours.
Oh.
In solidarity with all of those workers who are not dying. Pure theater here.
Well, it's funny because I remember coming across an article in the troglodytic right-wing knuckle-dragging publication The Nation that actually called it overdramatic, and so I don't know how else to say it. I mean, basically, you have Greg Casar, who is thinks he's Gandhi, but more of like a Wish.com Gandhi, and he makes this whole theatrical thing like, I will not, until the nurses say that I will not imbibe water and then like you look like 7.5 hours later and he's like, I did it,
Yeah, right.
And like, I made the observation that like if you're seminal, like attention getting achievement in Congress, now granted I'll give him his due, it is his first term, I'm sure he has many more bad ideas for subsequent ones.
Oh, great.
But if your big milestone achievement is basically skipping lunch to protest a law that hasn't taken effect yet, that again is a ancillary aside, invalidates an ordinance that never was enforced. Like, this is slacktivism at its best. Like, I mean, even like the squad man. Turns out he is in the squad, so I can't make that joke. But it turns out even people in the squad are like, you can't even like fake having some skin in this game. It's
At
like
least 24 hours doing something.
Yeah.
And he only said water and food. I mean, does that, that doesn't mean everything. So he could probably have had some kind of
Well, I mean, in
nutrients.
I mean, in the Jewish culture, you start, like Yom Kippur fast at like 13, and it's 24 hours.
Yeah, right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so like you're
Even
one,
intermittent fasting, I think you go for a little bit longer.
yeah,
than
you're
that.
1/3 of the way there, guy.
So Melissa, next time you skip lunch, you can say it was in solidarity of some cause or something. And those of us with young kids, I mean, we easily go 8
Yeah.
hours or more.
That's what
without-
people on Twitter were saying. They were like congratulating him and saying he should get a trophy for existing between like early lunch and
Right.
late dinner.
Well,
Yeah.
see, if you're if you're a witness at like a Tex Ledge hearing, like,
Oh, yeah.
you can go without, like, I mean, you can go in the same seat.
Right.
For
For
10,
that
12
long.
hours at a
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, bring a bag of chips or something with
But then
him to
again, they do
that.
legislating up there. He's only experienced the Austin City Council and Congress.
Does this, Melissa, does it sort of political, looking at the political questionnaire, does this just feed cynicism into these political antics? This is the kind of thing, because I've made comments on this show tons. I just think Washington's fundamentally broken. You said it was a disaster when you were up there and we're happy to
yeah.
leave. This is the kind of thing that, especially at the federal level, just feeds into the cynicism people have about politics and what they're doing up there.
1000%. I think, like when I got married, my husband didn't know much about politics. Now he's very into it, and it's like the first thing that he asked me, and he's just constantly baffled by the things that we deal
Poor
with.
David.
Yeah.
Poor David.
So I think absolutely.
Shout out, though.
And and I think that a lot of the things we deal with here have even, because I grew up in Bolivia, they've even made me look at Bolivia in a new light because
wow.
we're totally dysfunctional. Socialist government. Like we were, 14 years with a dictator, but we still don't have these issues.
Wow,
And I
America,
think it
worse than
shows-
Bolivia.
No.
Well, we're going to have to spread the
definitely-
jury to the rankings on that.
Definitely not. I
Yeah, what's
just think
CNBC going to say about that?
we still don't deal with like the funny issues and like even a lot of the serious issues, like I saw that you wanted to talk about like some of the issues with like porn in schools.
Yeah,
like
right.
just I guess made me grateful that a lot of that has not gotten to Bolivia yet. But
Yeah. Okay. And I did want to talk about some of those parent empowerment issues, but we are short on time. But I'm glad we went over. We talked a lot about border
Yeah.
security. Again, if you're not talking about border security and immigration, you're not talking to Texans for sure. And you're not talking to the majority of the country who care about this issue as the number one issue. So thank you for being on today, Melissa. We really
thanks for
appreciate you
having
being
me.
here. Absolutely. All right. So that does it for today's show. Again, we really appreciate all the listeners and all the watchers. If you want to get in touch with Derek and I, of course, we're on Twitter. I'm at Real Beefill. Derek is at Cohen at TPPF. Is that right? Cohen at TPPF. I'll write that down someday. So we really appreciate you listening and watching. If you have any feedback for us, you can catch us there. We'd love to get your comments and questions and any issues that you think we should cover. So until next time, do good and risk the consequences.